Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from different parts of the world. We hope everyone is well and safe. My name is Sareen Casey, and I'm the project associate at HITAP. And on behalf of the organizing team and today's speakers, I would like to welcome everyone to the part 2 of the ADP HITAP webinar series on knowledge exchange. So as you know, this webinar series contains 3 parts, and we have finished the first webinar series on identification and prioritization, and today's focus will be on procurement of health technologies and price negotiation. And we also have the third webinar series part on implementation and monitoring and evaluation. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today's session. We have opening remarks from the chair, Dr. Ruth, followed by 2 presentations from Ghana and Thailand, followed by a quick Q&A and discussion. So I encourage all the participants to send us the questions to these speakers. And we have an interesting exercise video from Bhutan by Mrs. Deepika, followed by an interesting discussion, we hope, on COVID-19 and how we can procure during public health crisis. We have representation from Thailand, Ghana, Dr. Hugo from Imperial College, and Africa CDC by Dr. Marawi. And we will close the session by a summary and key points from the chair and the speakers. So next slide, please. So now I would like to introduce the chair for our session. As I said, Dr. Ruth. She is a public health physician and independent consultant in global health, pharmaceutical policy, and health technology assessment. She has worked in more than 15 countries on assignments for the World Bank, WHO, PAHO, NICE International, and also several national Ministry of Health. Her previous role, she established and directed the National Policy Unit in Australia, Department of Health. And I could go on forever regarding her publications and her fellowship and her contribution to global health. But without further ado, I would now like to give the floor to our chair, Dr. Ruth.
Thank you, Saran, for that introduction. Welcome everyone to the second in this 3-part series of webinars on knowledge exchange in the time of COVID-19. I'm delighted to be joining you as chair for today. I'm going to make just a few brief remarks, excuse me, by way of introduction, and then we'll move quickly into what promises to be a fascinating agenda. I'm sorry. I'm just having a technical difficulty. No, I'm back again. Apologies. I'd like to begin with a quotation. In 1940, in the midst of World War II, Sir Winston Churchill is credited with saying, quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." I want you to ponder on that for a moment, and I'll come back to it shortly. As we are all well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has rapidly exposed the vulnerabilities of health systems all around the world and worsened the challenges in already resource-constrained environments. As a result, it's exacerbating the difficulties already faced by the most vulnerable across the globe. It's enormous and ongoing stresses on acute care facilities, on our health workforces, public health programs, and institutional capacities. It's displaced routine and chronic care and undermined routine vaccination programs. And these are just the short-term impacts. The effects on the domestic and the global economy will have long-term effects on individual and population health. And we still don't know the nature and extent of the care needs of the survivors. We don't have any effective treatments other than supportive care, and we wait hopefully for 1 or more vaccines to help us find our way out of the COVID wilderness. Differences in perspectives on how to respond most effectively to the pandemic have also created massive controversy amongst scientists, economists, policymakers, and civil society on adaptation versus mitigation, suppression versus elimination. And in some countries, the arguments have been framed as preserving the economy versus protecting the population, especially the elderly and vulnerable from the virus, creating in what I believe is a false dichotomy. What isn't in dispute, though, is that the pandemic has created huge supply chain disruptions all around the globe. And these have affected most commodities, not just those in healthcare. The direct effects of the pandemic, as well as those resulting from efforts to protect public health, have created bottlenecks in the supply of raw, intermediate, and final products in every sector. As WHO has said, the single most important priority of the global community is to stop the COVID-19 pandemic in its tracks, to halt its rapid transmission and reverse the trend of consequential global distress. This goal is really only achievable when everyone, everywhere, can access the effective health technologies for COVID-19 detection, prevention, and treatment. The scope for strengthening capacity and processes for the selection, allocation, and provision of health resources was well recognised before the pandemic. In the post-pandemic world, it becomes even more critical. More than ever, COVID-19 has demonstrated the critical importance of international cooperation to restoring global health security and of engagement and partnership between scientists and government and between government and industry. So at this point, let me return to Churchill's quotation where I began: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." How can we take advantage of this crisis to improve our supply chains and procurement mechanisms as part of the process of rebuilding our economies and shoring up our health systems? Governments around the world have had to make and will continue to have to make major decisions requiring the synthesis of rapidly changing, complex, and sometimes even contradictory information. Clearly, evidence is critical. Currently, efforts are mainly focused on responding directly to the pandemic. However, in the spirit of not letting a crisis go to waste, economic recovery presents an opportunity for governments to question their approaches, reflect on their existing mechanisms, identify specific vulnerabilities, and rebuild a more resilient supply chains for healthcare commodities. This will include expanding countries' technical capacity and developing and reinforcing processes for making evidence-informed healthcare decisions to select and procure cost-effective technologies, not only for COVID-19 and other communicable diseases, but also to address the growing burden on communities. So, in this second seminar in the series entitled Pennies on the Dollar, we're going to focus on procurement and pricing of commodities. In order to support efficient, equitable, and sustainable health systems, it's important to develop strategic approaches to procurement, to negotiate, regulate prices so that we can ensure that medicines, vaccines, and other health technologies can be sourced at prices that reflect value for money. Medicines, vaccines, and other health products clearly comprise a very large share of total expenditure in low-income countries. Developing and implementing policies and programs that optimise pricing and procurement can improve efficiency and sustainability, and the use of evidence to support pricing and procurement can enhance health system efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, we're going to begin with sharing information about the best practices in pricing strategies and procurement in different contexts. And we're going to do this by learning about key aspects of the procurement systems in Thailand and Ghana. And we're going to explore the role of evidence and the use of HTA in supporting procurement processes and price negotiations. Then in the second half of the webinar, we're going to share some experiences and challenges in procurement encountered and price negotiation encountered during public health crisis, drawing on the experiences gained in the current pandemic. And we'll try to brainstorm some potential solutions and hopefully identify some key lessons for the future. So let's begin hearing about and sharing experiences in procurement from Ghana and Thailand. Our first speaker is Mrs. Jocelyn Aziz. Mrs. Aziz is a pharmacist with an MBA in finance and also a master's degree in procurement and supply chain. She has over 28 years of experience with the Ghana public health sector and has worked in various capacities, including Director for Procurement, and she is currently the Director of Pharmaceutical Services for the Ghana Ministry of Health. Please welcome Mrs. Jocelyn Aziz. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a slight hitch. So a warm welcome. I've been given only 10 minutes to do this, so well, I'll give it my thought. We'll look at the view of the procurement system in Ghana. And then I would try to explain to you the framework contracting and how it has helped Ghana. The third of my presentation will be looking ahead, using the evidence from our ATA for price negotiation. And we'll use the hypertension study as an example. Next slide, please. So this is how the procurement system in Ghana is. Procurement done in Ghana is done with the legal framework of our Procurement Act. And this act was enacted in 2003 and amended in the year 2016. Key principles underlining the legal framework under which all procurements are undertaken in Ghana is transparency, fairness, accountability, and value. Act, as I said earlier on, has been amended. And what has the amendment brought for? In the past, if you went through a procurement and you are able to evaluate and come up a contractor, the old act did not allow you to, as it were, enter into negotiations. But with the enactment of the amendment, now there's provision made for contract negotiations, even after going through the entire process. Another thing that the amendment has made provision for is the issue of multiple contractors. Either in the old act, which is the Act 663, you could just come up with just one contractor, apart from the fact that you couldn't go into negotiations, the procurement process, you could only have just one contractor. So if you like, you can say it was a winner-takes-all situation. With the amendment to the Act, now there's provision made for multiple contractors. What this means, in order to mitigate your risk, after going through the procurement process, you are now allowed to enter into contracts with more than one contractor. And this is very, very good innovation. And of course, we are able to now use what we call framework contracts, and my to seek to delve more contracts and how it has Ghana. Next slide, please. Yes. So framework contracting is a payment method, and I will explain further. It's set in our National Medicines Policy, which is the third edition, published in 2017. Medicines Policy seeks to set the agenda for how medicines are regulated in the country, about quality assurance, governance structures, and everything that has to do with how medicines are handled in Ghana. And in policy, we have the framework contracts embedded in it. Ladies and gentlemen, also embedded in our supply chain master plan, and I believe very few countries have the supply chain master plan. Ghana, way back in 2002, developed the supply chain master plan that detailed out several actions aimed at ensuring that our procurement, our supply chain, including procurement, is more robust. So in the supply chain master plan, we had issues of, we had interventions aimed at ensuring that our distribution systems were problems that we had identified in our distribution systems were addressed. Issues of information systems to support our supply chain were also addressed. And one of the key interventions mentioned in the supply chain master plan was the use of contracting to manage the fragmented procurement and ensure that we get more value for money. Next slide, please. So what is framework contracting? Simply put, it is a procurement process that results in long-term contracts. And as I've already said, it's part of the ongoing reforms to strengthen and improve the performance of our public health supply chain in Ghana. We did this with several partners. Key amongst them was the Global Fund. The emphasis was on certain selected essential medicines to be procured and stored at our regional medical stores and teaching hospitals. Like I said, it was to remove the fragmentation within our supply chain at the time. It was also intended to increase the benefit of economies of scale, ensure continuous availability of good quality health commodities at affordable prices. We also use the framework contract as a bargaining tool for effective price negotiation, and I will explain. So this is what it is. Framework contracting is undertaken. Please go back to the others, the slide. Yes. So the idea is to undergo a procurement process, just like any other tendering process. But the key thing here is that you are consolidating your needs for a given period. You are quantifying it. You are having an estimated budget. And more importantly, whoever wins is asked to deliver to the regional medical stores. In the past, what we were doing was that we were allowing contractors to deliver at the central warehouse, and facilities at the regional stores would now have to access commodities from the central medical store. We realized that this brought a layer of cost. And so the framework contract sought to take away this layer of cost such that the commodities would be to the regional medical stores. So what we did was that, next slide, please. Next slide, yes. We decided to start as a pilot. So we used some stringent criteria, which was mainly based on the high value, high volume cost for our NHIA. And we selected 54 medicines to be procured under the framework contract. The total cost was about $12 million. We used consultative process to agree on the process. And then the procurement process itself was by national competitive tendering. And I must say the entire procurement process was managed by a customized procurement software that we call TIOMS, that is the evaluation and order monitoring system. So realistically, this is what happened. Together with the regional medical stores and the teaching hospitals, we quantified and for a given period, which was 12 months, each of these 54 selected medicines, the tender, and together with the regional medical stores and the teaching hospitals, evaluated the tender. The peculiar thing about the framework is that rather than having one particular supply winning a particular, we had a minimum of between 2 to 4 contractors. And that is what I spoke about when I said the amendment of our procurement law allowed us to do what we call multiple contracts. So in this, what did this bring to the table? It helped us to mitigate our risks. Which risks are one? In the event that you went through a procurement process and you just picked one person, the danger here is that should something happen and that particular contractor is not able to buy, then you will be held. So by selecting more than one contractor for a given product, we were able to ensure that in the event that we do not supply, the others put in the gap. But that also had its challenges. Next, please. Yeah. So like I said, the whole process, we were able to identify multiple contractors for each product. And we asked to deliver at the regional medical stores and the teaching hospitals. Another advantage that this particular framework contracting gave. In Ghana, most regional medical stores are challenged with space. So we had an M that allows the regional medical stores and the teachers to even work it out with the contractors so that they would supply the quantities in quantities that they could accommodate at a given time. Ladies and gentlemen, we went through the whole process and we realized that we had some challenges. Some of them were expected, but most of them were unforeseen, and I would explain. We had indebtedness within our system as a result of a few delays of reimbursements with the NHIS. During the time that we were tendering, this did not come up. At the time of contracting, it came up. When it came to the delivery, most of the suppliers came back to say that because of the high indebtedness between they and the medical stores and the teaching hospitals, they couldn't supply that we indicated in the contracts. This became a huge problem. Engaged them severally a day. Other issues, one of them was the issue of inflation. The process itself took long because it was new to us, and through it all, the entire procurement process itself, some time. So how do we solve this? We engaged with severally, and we agreed that indeed, because of the economies of scale, we had already obtained very good prices. So we did a lot of calculations back and forth and realized that we can give it an 8% upward review of the contract, which we did, and that's kind of resolved the issue. So this again led to some unforeseen long lead times. Initially, we had a huge quantification challenges, but that was not too serious. Supply planning was the little issue, but it wasn't too serious. It was a high indebtedness that really derailed or a few disadvantages. Even though we made provision for multiple contractors, we had a few medicines that, through nobody's fault, we had only one supplier. And the very problem that we were trying to solve emerged. So for some very few commodities, because we had only one single supplier, there were supply issues, and this affected some of the other fill rates. We also realized that coordination and information sharing at the regional level was a problem. But moving forward, we've launched the second one. Most of these problems have been resolved. The first pilot, sort of gave us leverage to learn a lot. And so moving forward, the second pilot, which involves now 65 selected medicines, is going on very smoothly. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Please go to the previous slide. So in essence, this is showing is that despite all the challenges, the framework contract really helped. You could see from the graph that the availability before the contract and after shows that we indeed, the framework helped us to improve our availability. Slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. So overall, it was a good process. It gave us the opportunity to take advantage of economies of scale, where make use of multiple suppliers. Availability was improved. We had very good prices. Thank you very much. Yes. So looking ahead, what do we intend to do? I'm running out of time, so I'll try to kind of speed it up. Ghana has had a rush with HTA, and so we intend, we use the contracting as a price negotiation, because after going through the process, we engage suppliers and we negotiated. This is something that we hadn't done in the past. Moving forward, we intend to use HTA also to leverage on our price negotiations. At the moment, we are lucky. We've had some HTA done for hypertension. So we intend to use those models to leverage for the prices of two particular commodities, amlodipine and benzoyl in the context of price negotiation. We intend to use this to negotiate, and in doing so, to adapt to existing benchmarks so that at the end of the day, we'll get more value for money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jocelyn. That was great. A very rapid summary and recap. So that was very interesting. We heard that Ghana is built on the foundation of its 2017 National Medicines Policy, amongst other things, to establish framework contracting as a procurement process that has been not without challenges, but has been ultimately a positive development that's improved availability significantly and improved prices. And looking ahead, Ghana is planning to build on the model and pilot study in hypertension to use health technology assessment to assess the cost effectiveness of products and determine indicative price ranges in which they may be considered value for money. So thank you. I'm not going to ask questions at the moment. We'll put some questions to the speakers after the next speaker. Right now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Mrs. Netnapis Sukonwanich. Mrs. Netnapis is a pharmacist with a master's degree in IT management. She's the former Deputy Secretary General of National Health Security Office in Thailand, and has played a key role in the establishment of universal coverage in Thailand as a pioneer in health insurance systems, information systems development at the National Health Security Office. In 2009, she began collaborating with the government pharmaceutical organisation for the establishment of a central procurement with a vendor-managed inventory program for high-cost medicines and vaccines. She's been nominated as a member of the National Essential Drug Subcommittee and chairs the Price Negotiation Working Group for Essential Medicines in Thailand. And she's also a temporary advisor to WHO in developing the revised guideline on country pharmaceutical pricing policy. Please welcome Mrs. Netnapis Sukonwanich.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to invite me to join this webinar. So for today, because of the time limitation, I will pay my content more on the procurement and negotiation first, okay? Please go to the slide, please. This session we'll talk about the medicine procurement and price negotiations in Thailand. Next. Please click again. Along the 15 years that we have implemented universal healthcare coverage, you can see that the escalation of the health expenditure from the three main health insurance schemes in Thailand, all of them increased very quickly. And the majority of the consumption for this expenditure come from pharmaceutical. So it means that we still not have a good process to control our pharmaceutical expenditure right now. Because once we implement the UC scheme, it means that the access to care is better, more people can access to the needed health service. But anyway, for the budget that the government have to spend will be increased very quickly. Next. So that's why in Thailand, we have established our national drug policy so many years. But in the year 2019, we tried to amend our national drug policy. We tried to keep the three keywords. It means that the more accessibility to essential medicine and the rational use of the medicine and quality assurance. So these three keywords we still keep in our vision, but you can see that we increased another keyword in our drug policy, which is a national safety alliance. So this keyword will put more strategy on how can Thailand keep the cost affordable and self-realizing. We have addressed more strategy in order to develop the domestic pharmaceutical industry, especially in biological products, the herbal medicine for self-reliance. We also developed the pricing strategy policy in order to control the pharmaceutical expenditure. So this is a little bit different from another country because most countries will try to keep only the three keywords: accessibility to essential medicine with the rational use of the medicine and quality assurance. But once you implement the universal health care coverage for a while, the increasing of the health expenditure cannot be sustain your system. So I think that keep in mind that keep the cost affordable and self-reliance will be put on the table topic. Next. So it means that all of the development of any new benefit package in Thailand, we try to use the HTA in our consideration. Both pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical benefit will be applying the health technology assessment. But the technology assessments in Thailand, we're not concerned just only for the cost effectiveness. Right now, we concern more on the budget impact analysis and feasibility study, because some benefit is a very high clinical value, but it's consume a lot of the budget. Then the government said that I cannot afford. Or some benefit, although they consume just only low budget, but the feasibility is not enough to provide a service to our population. So this three dimension is needed to consider along the application of the HTA. For the pharmaceutical products in Thailand, we rely totally on the National Essential Drugs Subcommittee. So it means that for the National Health Security Office, they will rely on the list of the medicine that are approved from the National Essential Committee. They does not have their own committee in order to consideration for any new medicine at all. But for non-pharmaceutical, they will set another committee inside the National Health Security Office. But anyway, they apply the similar way of the consideration, approval, and any concern, the same, similar to the way that the National List of Essential Medicine Subcommittee work. Next. So click again. Again. Okay, so from this slide, you can see that this is the development of the National List of the Essential Medicines in Thailand. We get the requirement from so many stakeholders, not only from the industrial side, we also get requirement from the public or civic side and from the academy. All of the requirements that have to raise to the Thai FTA, they will have to separate and submit to a different national expert committee. And so far, there are around the 202nd of the national expert panel for each group of the medicine. Okay, so for the consideration, the national expert panel, they will use the HTA, but it's not the level of academic evaluation. They use the ISEP score. ISEP score is come from the scoring of the information for the product, the safety, administration, restriction, the frequency of the drug administration, and efficacy or effectiveness. All of this information will put in the score. So the expert, they will scoring and summarize that which one will be the best one and the lowest cost that the government have to pay. And then they will nominate the items into another working group. Regarding to the medicine right now, because one items can have so many indications. So in Thailand, we have another working group we call the screening working group, which will coordinate the result from all the working group in order to make sure that the items have enough of the evidence to support for the decision making. So if they still have any controversial issue, they will submit to request for more evidence or more result from another working group. The first is the health economic working group, which will conduct the economic evaluation. And if any items have a high clinical value, but the price is still high, and the government said that I cannot afford, they will submit to another working group called price negotiation working group. And all of the results will consolidate again at the screening working group and submit to the National List Essential Medicine Subcommittee. In the past, the result here will automatically declare as essential drug list. But right now, because we try to control our budget, so we have created a new process to request the approval from the 3 main health insurance before we will submit the item to the national committee. So you can see the download here. We developed the HTA in 2 levels. The first level is something like a systematic review, and the second level is for the high cost medicine or the high budget impact. We conduct the economic evaluation. But anyway, this is not enough to control our budget. We still increase another process to approve for the affordability for the public health insurance again. So all of this is I can say that is a development of our the essential drug medicines in Thailand is maybe more careful and careful. Next slide, please. In Thailand, we have developed our cost effectiveness threshold in order to support for the price negotiation. This will represent the from the data of willingness to pay, and we have developed our own ICER. Right now, this is around the $5,000 per quality. So if any item that have the ICER beyond our threshold, I have to negotiate in order to meet our threshold. But it doesn't mean that this item will include it in our ED list. If the government said, or the public health insurance said that I cannot afford, I have to negotiate again and again, in order to meet our affordable price. So you can see the process of negotiation is not only concerned from the our ICER, we also concerned for the affordability from the government. Next. And this is our tool. We use a pricing and access tool. The price that we use in Thailand, we use not only external reference price, we also use our internal reference price, and sometimes we use a pricing control. It means that in one treatment we have a price cut. We call class-based pricing, but the popular that we apply in Thailand is the next one, value-based pricing using HTA, because the model that we have developed can simulate the threshold price for me in order to negotiate with the drug company. And in final, it's more easy for me. If they have a competitor, we will use a market driving pricing. For the access tool, we use a policy driven. It means that if any item can be approved from the National Essential Medicine Subcommittee, it means that there will be all of the public health insurance benefit package on automatically. But sometimes it cannot be approved because the price is still high. So maybe it's beyond me. We have to raise this issue to the government, and we apply the compulsory licensing or voluntary licensing. And the next of the access to is something like we set some parity setting for some disease or some group of the patient in order to access first. And right now, we also develop the patient access model, such like the management tree agreement and prior authorization in some defined indication. So this is a way that we have done in Thailand. Next slide, please. This is a result from our negotiation. When we apply our threshold price and I negotiate with the drug company, normally we'll increase around near the 50 to 20% normally, but sometimes it's still need more intervention, like just something like we use a medicine patent pool. It means we buy only raw material and then we ask for the Thai government pharmaceutical organization to manufacture. So this is the intervention that you have to do more if any models still cannot be run in the real world. Next slide, please. If beyond our negotiation, next slide, please. If beyond the negotiation, I will raise this item to the government. Maybe you will have to apply the compulsory licensing tax exemption for some free goods from the originator or voluntary licensing. This can discount a lot, more than 80 to 90% once we implement for the compulsory or voluntary licensing. But this is we have to raise this issue to the government for more decision making. Next. The appraisal for the result, you can see here. You can see that sometimes from the economic evaluation, there is that the benefit is a low budget impact, but maybe the policymaker will say that I don't want to implement because the coverage is still low, so the facility is still the problem. So that maybe they will say that I will not implement this benefit. But for some benefit, that's not cost effective, but they found the problem of equity problem or maybe ethical problem. Maybe they will say that they will implement and try to find the barriers and try to make more solution, such like for the immigrant for culture type 1 or PD first policy. These two benefit is not cost effective, but we try to develop our infrastructure in order to solve the barriers that cannot be access to this benefit. Next. Next, please. So this is the multi-criteria decision making, right? That we have to concern more, not only concern for the ICER only. Next slide, please. Next, please. And for the distribution, we applying for our vendor managed inventory in order to make ensure that all the medicine that have conduct the central procurement can be accessed definitely by the target population by use our contract with the government pharmaceutical organization. Next slide. Next slide, please. For the COVID-19, we applied our central procurement and our individual registry platform in order to support for the COVID-19, because we have to buy the favipiravir and then we have to store at the central warehouse and deliver to every hospital by using our platform. We scale up our platform to support for the COVID in time. Next slide. Next slide, please. So for conclusion, the strongest policy is a central procurement with the policy of the essential drug or working group that have negotiation at the national level. But anyway, for the facility level, we still have our health insurance scheme pool procurement, and all of the hospital, we still implement our reference price control and the regional procurement in order to control our expenditure. So the rest of my slide is the way that how we can control our procurement. We amend our Procurement Act not to use only price. We use the price performance for any medicine that need more consideration or the quality. So the rest of my slide is the way and the scoring, that how we put the score for our consideration, right? Like the performance, we put more the quality assurance, we put more score on the manufacturer and product consideration, right? Next slide, please. I would like to talk something about the WHO list. In Thailand, we found a problem that some items that apply in the WHO list of the PQ medicinal product. Most countries said that the post-marketing surveillance is still needed or not, I would like to recommend that the WHO PQ can guarantee the process but cannot guarantee the finished product. Anyway, I suggest that you have to conduct for the post-marketing surveillance. Okay. Next, please. I think that this is all. Oh, this is maybe the final. Click all the slide. I think that in the future, for the negotiation problem is the challenge of the applying the HTA for rare disease and for the emerging of the codependent technology, tangible of the biosimilar products, and the last challenge is the indication-based pricing, because this will be the new topic that we have to concern, because right now one medicine can have more than one indication. Okay, I think that this is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nednapis. That was a fascinating presentation and almost impossible to summarize reasonably in just 60 seconds because it's so rich and there's such information. Before I do, could I please ask everyone on the call to please mute their microphones? There's a lot of interference coming through with the speakers and it's very distracting for the speakers. So we've heard, I guess that one of the key lessons from that presentation is the importance of health technology assessment in from both medicines and non-drug technologies for the benefit package. We learned about some interesting aspects in the evolution of the national medicines policy. And we learned that Thailand applies a whole range of different pricing approaches and mechanisms as is appropriate to the selection and pricing of the drugs on the essential medicines list. And in fact, this prompts a large number of questions. And I'd like to start by asking Mrs. Nednapis if she could speak a little more on the use of managed entry agreements in Thailand and whether these are predominantly performance-based or financially based and how they operate. Thank you.
For the managed entry agreements in Thailand, we use in the financial base, such like for some rare disease that have only seldom of the patient. We have to use a risk sharing with the drug company, such like for the first 5 will be supported by the government, and if beyond the 5 patient, it will be the burden of the pharmaceutical company, and then for the second year, who will support for this budget. So we have to declare for the period of the treatment who will be afford for the treatment in each period. So most of the design are financial.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? When you're negotiating prices, what do you use as leverage? Is it the threat of compulsory licensing or denial of coverage, restriction? What typically would you apply as?
Typically, we use our threshold price. We conduct the economic evaluation in the HTA team that will develop the threshold price for me to negotiate. So I can say that the typical way that we have negotiated is a value-based pricing, a value-based price using HTA. This is a new word that we use at the WHO level. We use a value-based price under HTA or using HTA. Compulsory licensing will be, I think that's not normally I don't use the compulsory licensing or voluntary, but if I cannot negotiate to meet the affordability like hepatitis C, I negotiate already to meet the threshold price. But the government still said that it's still a huge budget impact. So I asked that how much money that you think that you can invest per year. So I think that for the next step is to ask for the government contribution to negotiate with the drug company. And that time I negotiate with the Gilead, and then they have a letter informed to Thailand that they allow Thailand to implement the voluntary licensing. So that's why we can parallel import the medicine to Thailand.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Ghana for a moment with a question. And I have two questions for Jocelyn, if I may. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what lessons or what advice you would give for a country based on your experience when they're seeking to introduce framework contracting. And the second question is, how important is it for you to be able to access price information from other countries in your pricing approaches? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for any country that wants to do framework contracting, that first of all, the country must look at their in-house expertise, because framework contracting requires a lot of knowledge about your own system. Learning from the Ghana experience, we realize that you have to contextualize the framework contracting. Yes, there are theories, a lot of theories about framework contracting, but when it comes to a real implementation, it's very important that you ensure that you are implementing it in tandem or taking into cognizance your country-specific issues. For instance, we realized that even though we knew that there was indebtedness in the system, we didn't expect that it would have an impact on delivery, but it did. So all I'm saying is that, one, we should be careful about existing issues within the country that have that can impact on the implementation. And I use that high indebtedness as one. Quantification is also key, because you realize that people had there was some skepticism around the whole thing. People didn't really believe that we could get as low prices as we did. And so, for instance, one of our teaching hospitals was not interested. And so we did not even include them in the quantification. But lo and behold, when we went through the process and the prices were very good, they rather came with huge quantities. And so we had to go back to the negotiation table to negotiate with the suppliers so that we could increase the quantities. So quantification is key. Another thing is coordination amongst the people. It's important that all the key players are brought to the table, and the process should be very consultative. Each and every one who is involved or who will be affected should be engaged from the very beginning. So in a nutshell, these are a few things that countries must pay attention to. One, they must ensure that they have the expertise in-house. If they don't, we engage to partner them. We can offer technical assistance. And then two, they must look at their country-specific issues that are likely to impact on the whole process. Yeah.
And just to recap, how important is other country pricing to your pricing processes, having access to price information from other countries?
Yes. So even before we started contracting process, each time we went through a tendering process, we would compare the prices that have emerged from it to what prices are attained in other countries. For instance, we're using IDA. IDA had a kind of, there's also the Global Fund pricing mechanism. Countries that have support from the Global Fund publish their prices. So we'd always compare it, and then if there's a need, we'd go for it, we'll end it. So it's very, very important. Comparing your price with what pertains outside your country. It's something that you can leverage on to reduce this further. And like I said, our laws did not even allow us for goods for us to negotiate once you've gone through a tender process. There are many more. It's become very easy to, even after going through the process, use referencing to negotiate further for lower prices with the quality, intact, making sure that price negotiation does not the quality. So
Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you. At this point, I believe that we are going to take a short break. So welcome to part 2 of this webinar, and the part 2 is entitled Riding Through the Curve, Procuring During a Pandemic, where we're going to explore issues such as how to determine needs assessment during a pandemic, bridging the gap between needs and supplies, and issues around quality assurance and value for money. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our 2 other speakers. Dr. Hugo Turner joined us from Imperial College London, where his research focuses on health economic analyses of infectious diseases in low and middle income countries. The goal of his research is to use health economics to optimise healthcare policy in low and middle income countries, and his work involves a wide range of infectious diseases, including some neglected tropical diseases, dengue, hepatitis C, HPV, hospital-acquired infections and tetanus. And he's previously conducted fieldwork in Ghana, Kenya and Vietnam. Welcome, Hugh Turner. Our other speaker is Dr. Marawi Arago, who is a medical epidemiologist, and I just pause there to apologise to Dr. Marawi if I have not pronounced his name correctly. Dr. Marawi is a medical epidemiologist with more than 10 years of experience in health systems and public health programs, disease surveillance, investigation and management of disasters and outbreaks, and evaluation of surveillance systems. He currently serves as acting head of the Emergency Preparedness and Response Division at the Africa Centre for Disease Control, Africa CDC, where he oversees coordination and capacity building of African Union member states for emergency preparedness and response, and for the preparation for medical and non-medical countermeasures. From 2013 to 2016, he served as a member of the African Union Multinational Task Force for the establishment of the Africa CDC, which developed the structural, legal and financial blueprint for the organisation. Previously, Dr. Marawi served as an advisor to the Minister of Health of Ethiopia on public emergency management. Welcome, Dr. Marawi. We're going to start now with a few questions to our speakers, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Marawi to give a presentation. I'm going to start by asking Hugh Turner, how can the use of models help with planning resources and quantities? How can we perform needs assessment in the context of a pandemic?
So hello everyone. I think modelling here can play 2 very important roles. The first is it can look at the needs for COVID itself. So for example, there was a recent paper in The Lancet that projected the healthcare resources that are needed for an effective response against COVID in low and middle income countries. I'm attaching the link here. So firstly, they can look at COVID, and they can also try and look at other diseases, such as the knock-on effects. So there's other papers that have tried to do similar work, but on the potential impact on HIV, tuberculosis and malaria. I think the key point I want to raise is that the needs assessment and the model won't just be on COVID itself. They'll also need to look on the knock-on effects for other diseases. However, it's really important to understand here that mathematical models combine our current understanding of lots of different features of a disease in order to investigate its dynamics. So this always means there's uncertainty, and this is particularly true for a new disease like COVID, because there's lots of things we don't know. That said, in my opinion, as long as you're not trying to use the model as a crystal ball to predict the future, they can still be a powerful tool for conducting these types of need assessments and projecting what might be needed. There is uncertainty, but these models are summarizing our best knowledge at the time, and at least in theory, we can scientifically examine this uncertainty and look at different scenarios. There's two challenges I want to raise of using models in this way, particularly during a pandemic. The first is that the projections can often get taken out of context, and this can be damaging. I'd like to use the UK as an example here, because the model showed in around March, when our pandemic was starting to reach its peak, that if we were to do nothing, 200,000 people could die. And this result is partly what drove us into our first lockdown. It was a very powerful message, particularly to the politicians. But now, several months later in September, I'm seeing people in the news talk about, well, the model said that 200,000 people would die, and they didn't. This means that all these projections are wrong. So this is just a lesson that it's really important to keep these projections and the modeling in context. And this is because even small changes like a new test becoming available or slightly different intervention can change the implications of the results and the projections and their relevance to your needs assessment. Second point I want to raise is for low and middle income countries, there's often less capacity to develop their own models, and they're often then adapting global models or using published results. The problem here is in the absence of proper guidelines, the models or their projections could be misused, and this can lead to unintended consequences. Particularly now, there's not just one model available, there's lots of different models. I'd like to highlight here that there's a COVID multi-model comparison collaboration, and they're providing reports and making practical recommendations and guidance to modelers and decision makers on the appropriate use of these models and how they can be effective for a policy response. And I think this is going to be a very useful resource in the coming months, which I'm attaching here. So to summarize, I think models are going to be useful for these needs assessments because they summarize our best knowledge at the time and allow us to investigate the dynamics. But there is a lot of uncertainty, particularly for a pandemic like COVID. So we need to make sure we're using these models in the right way.
Thank you. I'd like to now put a question back to Mrs. Netnapis and Jocelyn about what kinds of responses your countries have, or what kinds of effects have been felt by your countries in the face of the epidemic in terms of supply shortages or inflated prices. And I'd ask you to keep your remarks very brief. Who to go first?
Jocelyn will be first, or I will answer first?
Please go ahead.
Okay. For the pandemics, I think that it's maybe the different situation like COVID-19, right? Because when we talk about the price, the fact of the manufacturer to set the price is they have to concern for the market share. But for any medicine that have becomes a breakthrough product, they can set their own highest price that market can bear. But anyway, right now for Thailand, we try to think about the model of the negotiation. We separate into 3 models right now for COVID-19. We think that if they have a competitor, we will use a pool procurement in order to lower the price. But at the beginning of the implementation, if we cannot find the competitor, maybe the agreement with we call the managed entry agreement with a pharmaceutical company, the contribution from the private side and the public side will be better. But anyway, this have to be have economy of scale in order to make sure for the production. And right now we have our procurement for the Vaccine Act in order to support the security for the vaccine. We try to implement what we call the something like a long-term, the multi-year contract for the vaccination, which will be different from the other pharmaceutical products. And finally, is to try to encourage our domestic R&D. So right now we have a 3 model that we try to make a decision right now. I think that the tentative way right now is the second one, is the agreement with a private or something like some R&D pharmaceutical company, to ensure that we can access in time. So right now, we try to try these 3 models.
Thank you. Jocelyn, would you like to comment on the extent to which Ghana has encountered issues in shortages and pricing in the context of COVID?
Yes. Unfortunately, I lost. So if you can please recap a bit. I couldn't hear you well.
I'm sorry. I was just asking whether or not you have noted unusual supply shortages or inflated prices as a result of COVID, and what efforts have been put in place to mitigate this.
Yes, thank you very much. Initially, prices really went very high, particularly for face masks and hand sanitizers. So what did we do? Quickly, the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Food and Drugs Authority, together with other government officials, engaged our local manufacturers, and they were resourced, and with guidance from the FDA, they were given specifications and assisted to rise up to the occasion and produce. So we had a whole lot of local manufacturers producing hand sanitizers and face masks. So initially, yes, we had shortages, and yes, we had price hikes. But as I speak with you, the prices have come so low, especially hand sanitizers and face masks are available at affordable prices. The FDA really played a key role. They helped them with the certification, like I said. And so we have, as I speak with you, locally manufactured masks, which are actually registered by the Ghana Food and Drugs Authority. So this is how we went around it. As I speak with you, even the Ministry of Trade has also engaged some local manufacturers who are now manufacturing beyond the face masks, the gowns, theater gowns, disposable theater gowns, other PPEs are now being manufactured, even though it's at a low scale. Government is really putting effort to help them to be able to stand up to the occasion. So this is how we have got this. Thank you.
What about, if I may, what about non-COVID medicines and health commodities?
Yes, particularly with the vitamin C's and the rest. Again, the local manufacturers rose to the occasion. So initially, yes, we had some shortages in the system, to the extent that when India said they were even stopping the importation of raw materials, we had shortages in the system. But I must say, local manufacturers rose to the occasion, and with the vitamin C and the rest, the situation is way, 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 way better now. So what COVID-19 has taught us is that moving forward, we should be able to build more resilient local manufacturing systems that can support us in instances of pandemics. So it's something that we are really looking at. We already have a strategy for local manufacturing. We're looking at it seriously and seeing to its implementation. COVID-19 for us, like other countries, has been a wake-up call for us to pay more attention to our local manufacturers.
So in a sense, if you like, not wasting a good crisis.
Come again?
I said, so in a sense, you are not wasting a good crisis by building.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
For advantage.
Thank you. So I'd like to move now on to ask Dr. Marawi if he would kindly give us his presentation, where he's going to talk about 2 strategies employed by Africa CDC to combat COVID-19 supply issues in the region. Thank you, Dr. Marawi.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, colleagues in HITAP, and for having me. My name is Mara Rago from Africa CDC, Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa Union, here in Addis. Slides, please. Good. So here, I'm here to share you our experience in supply chain management during this pandemic as Africa CDC. Africa CDC is mandated to support all 55 Africa Union member states and in all areas possible. Next. So my presentation, I will give you the brief overview on Africa CDC and some supply-related challenges that we faced during this pandemic, and a brief overview on Africa CDC response and to the challenges and major supply chain lessons learned for the future public health emergencies. Next. Slides, please. Okay, good. So in a nutshell, Africa CDC has been supporting member states in different disease outbreaks. Particularly with this pandemic, we have different technical working groups, task forces, steering committees to the highest political level possible in this continent, with all the heads of states engaged, of 55 member states across the continent engaged. So we support in 4 main areas. I can put it like in 4 areas, like policy, advocacy, and coordination at the presidents and prime ministers level of the Africa Union, Africa CDC initiatives and continental strategies. And the second one is developing and disseminating guidance documents, including IPC guidance and so on. And we also provide technical support through training, research, and support by deploying technical experts to member states based on their needs and demands. And the last one is, which is a cross-cutting, of course, is support distribution of IPC supplies and the critical care medical and diagnostic supplies across 55 member states. And as Africa CDC, we operate at HQ as well as in 5 regional collaborating centers, which are based in Nairobi, Zambia, Lusaka, Gabon, and Nigeria, and in Egypt. So this, all these RSCCs, regional collaborating centers, and the HQ were seamlessly coordinating and working together to support all 55 member states across different areas. So supply chain was one of that, which is cross-cutting across different sections. Next. So what happened during this pandemic back in January, February, was the disease was new, and it was rapidly escalating across different continents, and a number of countries were affected, and supplies turned to be very really shortage. That was not an African only challenge, but it's a challenge across the continent, across the whole world, and high demand and quality with new products coming into the picture. Some qualities were compromised, and that was also another international challenge that we faced. And we saw this thing with, which has also exacerbated by export restriction, border closure, and so on. So some factories are also repurposed, that is to compensate for this challenge. And some, like some countries also engage to have a kind of supply diplomacy to get the supply needs met for this pandemic. It was really very fragile turmoil situation during the very beginning of the first 3-4 months of the pandemic. Next. So African CDCs faced major challenges across the supply chain system, from quantification and up to the delivery, logistic and delivery of supplies. And if you remember, at the very beginning, we don't know this disease. This is very new disease. We don't know what is the production rate of this the disease and so on. And it was very difficult to have a quantification. And there were different models, and models were based on their available knowledge at that time, back in February, March. So some estimation as high as 100% infection and of the continent, and low testing results, no data. And it was really very difficult for quantification to give, for us to give a quantification across the continent. So then we're faced also another challenge with procurement processes. Within the procurement process, as you know, Africa is a major importer for all medical supplies, in general, health technologies. And we have some financial constraints, and there is also limitation in market intelligence analysis to deal with these uncertainties on supply chain and procurement process, and extremely competitive market. If you remember this, the prices were increasing every other day. There was a price doubling, and it was really very difficult for African governments to come and buy from suppliers at that rate, because their regulatory or their procurement mechanisms will not allow them to be as such flexible and competitive. And it was, if you remember, all these big economies were also marching to get all these supplies, and country as small as like Togo was competing for the same supplies with the countries as big as America, US. You can imagine, both economically and geographically, and population size and so on. All these challenges during the procurement process, and it is also the payment. Some suppliers were requested us to facilitate advance payment, 100% advance payment, and the quotations were like very few days, like 3 days, 4 days, and so on, which is practically impossible for most African countries to get this process going. And logistically, it was really also difficult. Once you get these supplies, after all this hassle, it was very unfortunate that borders were closed, one of the measures, and public health measures for that matter. And there were very limited humanitarian corridors that we use with World Food Program. And there was really very limited stocks by that time to cope with this really straining pandemic situation. And we were frequently requested by member states as Africa CDC to support some in sourcing supplies. Where can we get this item? Which one is really, which product is quality product? How can we get it? Can you negotiate us a price, and so on? It was a really very challenging requests for us from almost all 55 member states. And payment arrangement, like as I said, it is some requests like 100% payment upfront. That is all this they requested us to facilitate, and logistic as well. So all the requests and the needs and demands on supply chain was really very challenging right then. Next slide, please. So facing these challenges, Africa CDC and the Africa Union in general has to conform to the situation based on our capacities and capabilities. We established different technical working groups and a task force. We launched an initiative like Partnership for Accelerated COVID Testing. And we also activate our emergency procurement procedure, which is of the Africa Union Commission, which is a document prepared like 2 years ago, but has never been tested. And this time we activated. This is one of the mechanisms that we try to cope, and it gives us a leverage to go for limited bidding or single sourcing, and so that's activation was very, very important. Another initiative or mechanism that we try to cope is interdepartmental coordination across the whole of the Commission here in Africa Union. Different commissions have different capacities, like the Peace and Security Department has the capabilities of the military capabilities with all the military facilities, including air bridges and so on. So we leverage all the existing capacities within the Commission to cope with the existing challenges, including the transportation as well as border closure. And we deployed teams of experts to different countries using the military flight. That is another interdepartmental coordination that we put in place to cope with this challenge. Finally, we come up with a mechanism, we call it Africa Medical Supply Platform, where we have a digital platform intended to serve the whole African countries as a pool procurement mechanism. This is an important, really, I think maybe the legacy of this pandemic, if I may say, to address the supply challenges across the continent. You know, this Africa Medical Supply Platform is meant to be like a mini Amazon, as I usually say, where the suppliers and the buyers come together on one digital platform with a facilitated payment arrangement with a different bank. Then where all the suppliers, you know, when we go together as 55 member states, we get the leverage, like we leverage for price negotiation, because the continent is big. And unfortunately, we're like 55 countries with a population as low as 200,000 and as high as 200 and something million across different countries. But when we come together as 1.3 billion countries, that is a huge, huge market. And when we organize ourselves to have that kind of platform, that gave us really a good leverage to have a good price, a quality product across different suppliers across the whole of the globe. And we really got a good competitive price from different suppliers, world-class suppliers with all the qualities assured to meet. And this platform is now up and running. Next slide, please. So what is our value addition of this platform? This it has like a global manufacturers base, because we are 1.3 billion population with a good a market space, I think, for that matter. And it helps us also to do volume aggregation. A country like Ethiopia or Uganda may request 1 million or 2 million items, but when we aggregate, that will give us a leverage to do a good price. And there is also another opportunity to do a quota management mechanism, that all the supplies will not be taken by only few capable countries. So whoever procures through that platform will get a fair share of the existing stocks across different suppliers. So there is also a payment facilitation. When you register and put an order, if you fail to pay, there is an Afrexim bank that will facilitate your payment that you will reimburse back to Afrexim bank. So, you know, this gives us really good leverage because of such an advance payment, 100% payment and so on. The other one is all the freight forward companies are also our business partners, and freight forward logistics support is very easy, and we are really fast tracking with that. And this is very important, I think, a legacy for Africa Medical Supply, a legacy of this pandemic as medical supply platform. And currently we are running the COVID supplies only on selected COVID supplies, but the system is very flexible and they can afford to take different medical supplies based on need of member states in the future. Next. So just to give you the highlight, almost close to 90% of the whole member states are now onboarded. Even some countries from the Caribbean are also onboarded on this platform. And Africa CDC by itself has is placed order and to get some supplies worth around 20 million US dollar through this platform. And we get really a competitive market when you see outside the platform, the price, different prices. And when you see the prices in that platform, the prices are really incredibly very well negotiated. And I think that is also a win-win for also manufacturers because we go with a big market. That is also, it gives us a leverage for us to get the required supplies for different member states. Next slide. So what is the lessons learned from this is now where, we are challenged because we are really sole importers of all this, I think, health technologies for that matter. And I think currently enhancing supply chain preparedness is one thing that we need to take as a lesson, both in systems and structure.
Of course, maybe.
So the other lessons taken is supporting local manufacturing capacity. I think we had a good webinar, well-attended webinar about with local manufacturers or good medical supplies. In that platform, as I said, there is a section called Made in Africa, and that gives a leverage for these products to come into the platform and to get the continental market. I think we have to encourage member states. And for this, there is an Africa Union organ, Africa Development Agency, AUNEPAD. We have been working with Africa Medicine Agency, and they are really supporting. They have all the tools and materials to support local manufacturers. And I think this is one thing that we took lesson from this pandemic. And the other one is this procurement mechanism. I think we need to enhance our pool procurement mechanisms. Imagine all our essential, if you cross all our essential medicines list, almost 50, 60 or more than that % of these essential medicines are similar across the board, across the continent. If you bring them on board on this platform, imagine how much this will contribute in securing access to medicine, access to healthcare, and so on. I think this is a good leverage that we are also learning, that it can expand to not only to COVID response supplies, but also to other items, to other supplies. The other one is, I think we need to also to think about enhanced resource mobilization. Also, I think a financial mechanism for such emergency response payments, payment facilitation, like what the Afrexim Bank is doing for us now. Like, next. So saying this, I think we have a lesson learned a lot from this pandemic, and this is the legacy that we can take, we can leverage, and moving forward, all and in meeting all the health technologies needed across the continent. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Murari. That was fascinating. I have lots of questions, but we don't have time for all of them, unfortunately. But a question that has recurred from the audience, has been mentioned by several people, is how do you facilitate the coordination across countries when countries have different laws and regulations to do with procurement and pricing? Is this a question of adapting to the CDC's platform rules as a prerequisite?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think these are very important questions. So we are not putting rules and regulations as Africa CDC. We gave that option for member states to go and get all the required items from the supply platform, where prices are well negotiated, where the stocks are well secured, and so on. These are the options that we give. Member states can go by themselves and procure through a different mechanism. But this is an option that we gave. They can see different suppliers, different price categories, and they can pick whatever they wish to pick based on their, sometimes even when it is a reagent, for example, different reagents are there. There are those reagents, they may need a different machines back home. So they have to see the reagents by themselves, and that gives them the leverage. And we get this and this opportunity to organize at the highest political leadership level, all the heads of states, all ministers of health, ministers of finance, and even ministers of transport were well versed with this platform, and they were given all the nitty-gritties or the details of the process they have to follow. Currently, this is not for, this platform is meant for only for state actors and like big NGOs who are not going to sell the items or the supplies from the platform, buying and selling from the platform. That is not allowed. This is for only because the prices are very cut very low. It's not going, if you buy and sell it, it will compromise the value addition of this platform. So we gave this to member states. We know different countries have different modalities of procurement and procedures that they have to follow, but this is also another option they have to consider. And whoever is interested to get items from that list, I think all the heads of states are well versed and informed.
You offer HAT for HIV, prophylaxis.
Sorry. So the other question is, I think, vaccine. I think, yes, as Africa CDC, we put in place a vaccine strategy for the continent that is presented to the highest level, to the heads of state of member states and endorsed it. We are actively engaged with current vaccine development. We have different consortia and on vaccine development, clinical trials, and then also vaccine access. As Africa CDC, when this comes into existence, I mean, these vaccines, we'll leverage that collective pool mechanism to get access to the vaccine from the global competition. So I think we are in a good position now to get really to sit in the negotiation table as a whole of the continent rather than bit by bit from country to country. So this has leverage, and the whole vaccine strategy is endorsed by the heads of state and government for the continent. And we are actively engaged in clinical trials. Currently, we are also on access. We are also doing, as Africa CDC, we are doing in 10 countries vaccine perception survey, which will help us in deploying vaccine when the vaccine exists. Thank you very much, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. That was fascinating. I'd like to bring in our other speakers now and have a bit of a round table and ask what the other speakers would like to comment on how their countries are preparing for accessing the COVID-19 vaccine. And I leave it to whoever would like to come in first to please speak up. I won't point to anyone in particular, unless no one speaks, of course, in which case I will point the finger at someone. Mrs. Nednapis or Mrs. Jocelyn, would you like to comment?
For COVID-19, right?
Yes.
Okay, for COVID-19, I mentioned that the price of the product is come from the situation of their natural is a breakthrough product or not, and is a have more competitor or not. But for COVID vaccine, I think that is an R&D product. So it means that this is a new product, is a breakthrough product. They can set their own price. So that's why Thailand, we decide 3 model, right? To support for the COVID situation. If they have competitor, we will have a pool procurement, which right now we cannot do because there is no competitor. Although they have so many companies that try to manufacture COVID, but it's still not success. So that's why we are go to the second model. We want to implement some agreement with the global or with the regional area or association in order to make sure that we involved in the order of the new vaccine in time. So now we are moved to the second way. But anyway, we try to encourage our domestic right now. We support some budget for drug companies in Thailand to produce the vaccine in our country. So this is a way that we try to sustain for the COVID vaccine. So I think that the way may not be in just only one way. We have to prepare in so many models that like I mentioned in Thailand, we prepare 3 models to support for this situation.
Thank you. Jocelyn, can I call upon you to share with us how Ghana plans to procure and negotiate a price for coronavirus vaccine?
Thank you. Currently in Ghana, we procure all our vaccines through the expanded program on immunization. And this we do mainly with our partners, mainly Gavi and UNICEF Procurement Services. I think this vaccine is new. We are a small country. It will be very difficult on our own to, based on the quantities that we would need, go directly to the manufacturers. So we'll use the in-country processes, use the UNICEF procurement processes. They also, what they do is that they pull procurement from other countries and are able to negotiate prices for us. So this is a process that we'll be using. Yeah, the same in-country structures that we use.
Thank you very much.
I think that for the low-income country, I have heard that Gavi have agreement with some company already, right, for the order of a COVID. But for the middle-income country, I think that they will face a problem that they cannot find where they can get this vaccine. So that's why for the country that are covered by Gavi, they have to prepare more model, not just to rely on the global fund, because they have to support himself. I recommend for the specification is better for the country to develop the we call the product qualification for the pool procurement right now, because the WHO have support this, and in the country that you have to bring this qualification to customize to fit with your country right now.
Since we're talking about COVID vaccine, can I ask whether countries have plans for rationing or prioritizing access to vaccine? Would anybody like to comment on that?
Okay, let me come here, Rose. Thank you very much, I think.
Please.
So All right, thank you. So I think as Africa CDC, we are at as Africa CDC as at a continental level, we are trying to get a negotiated price, and there is a science technical working group who will advise on how to use a vaccine, when to use the vaccine, and to whom to use this vaccine, and so on. So, but all that depends on the national policy mechanism. But technical support, technical guidance will be released from Africa CDC as well. If the supply is very short, limited, we'll advise who to target and when to target, how to expand based on the quantities we will get from the global market. So Africa CDC, I think I can say for now, is will provide such guidance, but will not decide on behalf of member states. And member states will, African Union member states will determine how to use, when to use it. But we will give a guidance based on scientific knowledge. Thank you. Back to you.
Do you get a sense, if I could follow up, do you get a sense that countries are taking different approaches to this issue, or do you see some consensus emerging consistent with your guidance? Or is it too early?
No, I think this is too early for me to comment on. We are just collecting all the perception study as well as other. We have a series of consultative meetings with member states and ministers of health and the ministers of finance. So we'll determine based on that and the existing science when the vaccine is out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to bring Hugo Turner back into the conversation at this point and ask him, are you there, Hugo?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, do you see value in early HTA of COVID-19 vaccines? And if so, what do you see as the challenges? And can I ask you to keep comments very brief, please, because we're short on time.
Yes, no problem. Well, firstly, I see a huge value in early HTA. I think it's going to be essential that we do it, and it's great to see that Thailand and Singapore are starting this. I do think a big challenge is that political considerations outside of cost effectiveness or the cost per DALY averted are going to play an even bigger role than normal. So this is going to make things like price negotiations much harder. And we really need to make sure we understand that the cost per DALY is not going to capture the true impact against this disease and its impacts on the society and the economy. So I think it is going to be challenging, and the key is to start the HTA process as soon as possible.
Thank you. A question that has arisen, has been brought up by several people, is given that the likelihood of ongoing shortages, ongoing supply constraints, is this a time when we need to reconsider our approaches to pricing and consider modifying our approaches to price regulation? And I throw that question to anybody who'd like to come in. Would you like to comment, Hugo?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I lost that bit.
I'm sorry. The question was, given that we are going to see ongoing shortages, ongoing supply constraints, and the need for rationing, is this a driver for reconsidering or reconfiguring approaches to pricing?
Yeah, well, I think one impact it's going to have is it changes the value of the COVID vaccine and how we value that as an intervention. And that is going to be for reconsider our procurement processes globally, and maybe thinking less as individual countries and more as regions and the potential power behind that.
I think that given the dynamic nature of the situation, the fact that, as you alluded to, we don't yet know the full impact of COVID-19 on Dali's foregone. How can, and you've talked about the importance of early HTA, how can we apply that dynamically so that we're not basically ascribing in the wrong value or inadequate value, if you like, to the vaccine by actually doing it too early?
It's a very good question. I think my answer would be the importance of considering different scenarios. So having a range of scenarios where we consider the different potential long-term impacts of the virus. And that's also going to be important on the individual level, because we're learning more and more of the potential medical consequences of being affected long-term. So it's not just the DALI averted of COVID, it's also its post-acute consequences. So I think it's going to be really important we consider different scenarios. But I think that is a very fair point. There is a danger of doing it too early and underestimating the value.
Thank you, Hugo. So we're running very low on time at the moment, and I'm conscious that there are many, many more questions that people would like to put. But one of the key questions that we attempted to address in this entire session was, can we develop guidance for countries in how to procure and negotiate in public health crisis? Can we provide some general guidance that could be applied effectively in a future public health emergency to ensure adequate supplies of essential medical commodities and if necessary, modifying regulatory processes to allow faster access? It's very difficult in this in this Zoom environment to throw the baton, to throw the microphone to someone. So I'm going to ask all of our speakers, please, to put yourself forward if you would like to comment on this question. And I welcome input from all of you. If you could keep your responses brief, however.
Let me come here, Rose.
Please.
Thank you. So I think this is very, very important question. I think in preparing ourselves for the next pandemic or even outbreak, local outbreaks, I think there are things that Jocelyn mentioned. Framework agreement way ahead of the event is one important way of doing this, securing supplies, vaccines, and so on. Some, even this kind of long-standing agreements is also very important in different ways. One, you don't need to have a warehouse for immediate, you don't need to worry about the shelf life and so on and so on. These are very important. And it is negotiated before the event, before the crisis, and the price will be really very important. The other is, I think we need to have a kind of emergency procurement mechanism, very flexible, that we, as Africa CDC, we activated here in Africa Union. There are so many events that we may not be able to predict right away. And if you see for the last 40, 50 years, close to 30 emerging diseases happened in the last 30, 40 years. So what does it mean is we can't, whatever we prepare, the first plan will be a failure. That is definitely known in emergency. When you are hit, whether you prepare very well with a plan, when you are hit, you will be destroyed. And the good thing is you can come up, recover very soon and fight back again. So I think in this preparation, these are the critical things that we need to think way ahead during preparedness process. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to comment?
Yes, Ruth.
Thank you, Justin. Go ahead.
To add to that, it's important that we form partnerships because, I mean, this is new. To be fair, we don't even have what it takes to be able to negotiate effectively. So it's better we come together, particularly for those of us in the low middle income, the low-income brackets to pull our resources together, do our cultivations together, and have, like you said, long framework contract suppliers.
On the
Thank you
nurses,
very
yes.
much. Yeah. Framework contracting becomes very, very, very important as a tool for procurement and price negotiation in issues like this we're talking about. So I think we should begin to think more about that. Thank you. Inform partnerships, like I said. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Netnapis, would you like to make a final comment? Because I'm going to have to wrap up shortly.
I have some paper that I work with the CGD for the procurement for the low-income country that will have a decrease of the global fund support. I think that I will try to find and share for all of you. And for the pricing policy, we have just finished our paper for the pricing policy with the WHO headquarters. I think that these two papers will be useful for this panel, and I will share for all of you.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. So, Hugo Turner, do you have any final comments that you would like to make?
Yes, just to add that I think model is going to be useful here, but we have to keep them in context and not use them as crystal balls. And I think early HTA is going to be very important, but we're going to have to think beyond a cost per DALI averted and a threshold. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Marawi, any final comments, please? Dr. Marawi, do you have any final comments for us, please?
Hi, Ruth. I think Dr. Marawi may have got logged out.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. So just a very quick wrap up because we've covered a lot of ground today and there's a lot, it's almost impossible to summarize in a few brief remarks what we've learned today. But I think some of the key messages, we've learned about the value of framework agreements and pooled procurement and the opportunities that they represent for securing supplies. We heard from Dr. Murari about the importance of flexible emergency procurement mechanisms. We also recognise from the discussion and the point was made by several speakers about the importance of partnerships and engagement, and something I alluded to in my opening remarks about the importance of engagement between government and researchers and between government and the private sector. And we learned from Hugo Turner that how useful models can be and the value of early HTA, but the importance of flexibility and the need for scenario analysis because the situation is evolving and is highly dynamic. It's not yet possible, I think, to develop clear guidance or absolute guidance for governments in how to respond specifically. But I do think there are some high-level principles that have been alluded to in the discussion that can be, if you like, can mature over time and be used to inform future pandemic responses and pandemic. There are many, many questions that have been put forward on the chat that we have not had an opportunity to discuss this morning, which is a great shame. But we would like to mention that we have a third webinar in this series, which will take place on, I have to ask Sarah to remind me of the date in a moment, but part 3 will be is entitled Sowing the Seeds and Watching Them Grow. And it will be an implementation and monitoring evaluation of evidence-informed service delivery. And it will build on our discussion of the importance of HTA to introduce real-world implementation of HTA projects and evidence-informed decision-making through case studies drawn from different parts of the world and from different stages of implementation, and identify health system efficiencies and highlight means of addressing them in preparation for improved use of resources in a post-pandemic world. I hope you will join us for that third webinar. Thank you and good morning or good evening.
Okay, next. Hi, Ruth. Thank you so much for chairing this session, and thank you to all the speakers. Really interesting discussions and very thoughtful presentations. As Ruth already mentioned, and something that I spoke to earlier at the beginning, that we will not be able to cover everything in 2 hours. That's why we have thought about creating ways to communicate with you so that we can continue this discussion and knowledge exchange. So a lot of participants have asked where they can access the materials. For those who have registered, we'll send you an email with the links where you can download these materials from the speakers. And those who have not registered will still be able to access them on both of the websites, as you can see on the screen, on HITAP and also ADP. And we are also adding additional features to our websites where participants, speakers, and the wider community and audiences can engage in discussions that are happening right now and potentially thinking about solutions. For example, the guidance that Ruth mentioned, which is really needed at this time. So something for all the participants to look forward to, and we will share the updates to all the participants whenever ready. Next slide, please. I know we've run out of time, but it would be great if the participants could give us their feedback. We can also share this over email, but it only takes a minute or two. So if you're on your phone, please scan the QR code and let us know what you thought of the session today. We would be really appreciative of that. I can also share you the link to this feedback form in a moment. There you go. I know some of the participants have already left as we've gone over time, but would really appreciate for those who are still on the call to quickly go through the feedback form and let us know how we can improve, and also what did you like, what did you not like, yeah, the general feedback. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to thank all the participants, the organizing team from HITAP and ADP, and our utmost gratitude to the chair and the speakers for making this happen and sharing this knowledge. And we look forward to continuing this engagement on our online platforms. So with that, I think we're going to close this webinar, and we welcome you to join us in the next webinar next week. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Have a lovely evening, day, or morning. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.